The sun beat down on the military base gate, metal fences glinting under the harsh light. A young woman stepped forward, ID in hand, but the military police stopped her abruptly. "Ma'am, you can't enter," one of them barked. She smiled politely, trying to explain, but her words fell on deaf ears. Minutes passed. Tension rose. Her heart raced. Little did they know the woman standing there was about to change the lives of everyone inside, including the officers who doubted her. The morning sun was merciless, beating down on the sprawling military base like a relentless spotlight. The chain-link fences shimmered in the harsh light, punctuated with sharp barbed edges, watchtowers, and the hum of patrolling vehicles. At the massive steel gate, the world felt divided. Inside was order, discipline, and hierarchy. Outside, freedom and unpredictability. A woman approached the checkpoint, walking calmly but with a sense of purpose that seemed almost unnatural in the stifling heat. Her steps were steady, deliberate, and measured, like someone who had faced far more than a tense military gate in her life. She wore a modest outfit, nothing flashy, but it carried a quiet dignity, a hint of authority hidden beneath a simple blouse and trousers. In her hand, she held her identification, crisp and precise, as if it were the key to opening not just this gate, but every door she ever encountered. The military police on duty noticed her immediately. Two young officers, barely in their 20s, stood rigidly beside the booth. Their eyes, trained to scan for threats, locked on her as she approached. They straightened involuntarily, one reaching for his radio as he muttered a warning under his breath. "ID, ma'am," barked the taller of the two, his tone crisp and demanding. The woman lifted her hand slowly, offering the identification with a calm smile. "Of course, here you go," she said, her voice smooth, polite, yet unwavering. It carried no hint of fear, no trace of hesitation, only a quiet confidence. The officer's eyes narrowed. He studied the ID, frowning slightly. "Ma'am, this isn't recognized by our system. You'll need to wait here until verification." A flicker of tension crossed her face, only for a moment. She nodded politely. "I understand. I will wait." But waiting wasn't going to be as simple as she thought. Minutes passed slowly. The sun bore down on the checkpoint. Sweat glistened on the officers' foreheads, but they stood firm, their hands hovering near their holsters as if anticipating trouble. The woman's calm demeanor only seemed to irritate them more. "Ma'am," said the second officer, younger and nervous, "you understand that without verification, we cannot let anyone enter. This is a restricted area." "I understand," she replied, her tone measured, almost soothing. "I assure you, there will be no trouble." Her words, instead of easing the situation, only seemed to escalate it. The first officer's jaw tightened. He had seen people try this. Smooth talkers, manipulators, people who thought charm could override protocol. He had trained for this. He would not be fooled. "Step aside, please," he said, signaling for another officer to come over. "We need to verify this immediately." She complied gracefully, moving a few steps to the side, but her eyes remained calm, observant. She noticed the tension in their posture, the uncertainty in their voices. She noticed everything. The way the younger officer's hands trembled slightly, the subtle impatience in the senior officer's stance. Around them, other personnel began to notice the commotion. A few soldiers on patrol slowed their steps, glancing curiously at the scene. Some whispered, exchanging puzzled looks. No one had ever seen this woman before. No one knew why she was here or who she was. The tension thickened. The officers began calling for verification over their radios, speaking in clipped tones that betrayed both urgency and doubt. The woman remained calm, her expression composed. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply waited, a silent storm contained in human form. As minutes stretched, impatience began to show. The taller officer finally snapped. "Ma'am, we cannot have unauthorized personnel standing here all day. Please explain who you are and why you are here." She smiled faintly, a small, serene smile that somehow disarmed the tension. "I am here on official duty," she said simply, I have orders that require my presence inside the base today. Orders? The officer repeated, disbelief in his voice. Do you have proof? Authorization? Anything? She handed the identification again, letting it rest in his hands, her fingers brushing briefly against his in the process. He recoiled slightly, startled by the quiet command in her presence. He examined the ID again, scrutinizing the details as if the truth of her identity might somehow reveal itself in the texture of the card. But the system would not recognize her. That much was clear. For the officers, protocol was law. They had been trained to follow procedure above all else. And yet, there was something different about her. Something they could not define. Something that made their doubts twist uncomfortably in their stomachs. Verification is taking longer than expected, the younger officer admitted, sweat running down his temple. Should we detain her temporarily? The senior officer hesitated. Something about her gave him pause, a strange, unexplainable authority. But rules were rules. Yes, temporarily. Keep her here until we get confirmation. A guard stepped forward to politely but firmly direct her to a small holding area beside the gate. She complied, moving like a soldier yet carrying the calm of someone used to being respected without demanding it. Her eyes scanned the surrounding area, noting the security cameras, the barbed wire, and the watchtowers, all part of a system she had likely navigated many times in her life. Meanwhile, whispers spread among the personnel. Who is she? Someone muttered. I've never seen her before, another replied, but some eyes betrayed recognition, fleeting flashes of understanding that passed before disappearing. She was clearly not an ordinary civilian, yet no one could place her. Inside the small holding area, she leaned against the wall, her posture relaxed, almost regal. She did not fidget. She did not complain. She waited, and as she waited, her mind worked quietly, assessing, observing, planning. The officers, meanwhile, grew more tense. They called their superiors, transmitted messages through encrypted radios, and repeated her details for verification. Each response came slowly, bureaucratically, creating a growing sense of frustration and unease. Minutes felt like hours. The woman, however, seemed untouched by the passage of time. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the anxiety surrounding her, and that contrast only magnified the tension. At one point, the younger officer muttered under his breath almost to himself, "Why is she so different?" The senior officer glanced at him, frowning. "Shh, don't speak like that." But the thought lingered. There was something about her presence that commanded attention, demanded respect, and unsettled the rigid structure of the gate. Something no identification card could quantify. Just as the officers began to worry that the situation might spiral further, a vehicle approached the gate slowly. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows. From inside, someone stepped out. A high-ranking official, moving with authority and urgency. The woman's expression softened slightly, though she remained composed. The officers stiffened. Their doubts and uncertainty suddenly felt trivial in the presence of someone far above them in rank. And it was then, as the commanding officer approached and recognition flickered in their eyes, that the first real shift in the tension occurred. The woman's calm patience had held the storm at bay. And soon, everyone would realize they had no idea who she really was. The black SUV came to a halt with a quiet authority that silenced the gate. Its polished surface reflected the harsh sunlight, and the subtle hum of its engine seemed to pulse like a heartbeat across the tense air. The woman's eyes flicked toward it, calm and unwavering. But beneath that composure, a flicker of anticipation glimmered. She knew what was coming, the moment where patience and dignity would meet recognition. From the SUV stepped a high-ranking officer, tall and commanding, wearing the uniform of authority that instantly shifted the atmosphere. His boots clicked sharply against the concrete, and every movement carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed, not questioned. The military police straightened immediately, almost stiffening with relief and dread simultaneously. They had followed protocol, upheld the rules, Yet here was a figure whose presence reminded them of their place. "Report," the officer demanded, his voice steady, measured yet unmistakably authoritative. The senior guard saluted crisply. "Sir," ma'am presented herself at the gate with identification, but it was not recognized by the system. "We have detained her for verification as required." The officer's eyes swept over the woman, taking in her composed stance, her quiet confidence, and the subtle aura of authority she exuded. Something about her was immediately recognizable. The moment of hesitation that had lingered at the gate returned, but now it was tinged with realization. "Her name?" he asked sharply, his gaze never leaving her face. "Emily Carter, sir," the woman replied calmly, holding her head high. Her voice had a quiet strength that seemed to resonate even across the tension of the armed guards. The officer blinked. Recognition flickered in his eyes like a sudden strike of lightning. "Emily Carter." His tone changed subtly, a mix of astonishment and respect. The two younger military policemen exchanged nervous glances. "Sir?" the taller one ventured. "Is there a problem with her identification?" The officer shook his head slowly. "No, there is no problem." His voice softened as he stepped closer to Emily, his posture relaxing. "There was never a problem. You have simply exceeded our expectations in a manner the system could not recognize." Emily inclined her head politely. "Sir, I understand that protocol must be followed. I did not wish to cause confusion." He gestured toward the officers who had detained her. "And you acted according to protocol. That is commendable. But you see now that there are some who cannot be judged by ID alone." The tension that had gripped the gate since her arrival began to dissipate. The younger officers straightened again, their faces red with embarrassment, realizing that their strict adherence to procedure had been both correct and incomplete. Correct in form, incomplete in understanding. The commanding officer turned his gaze toward them sharply. "Protocol is important," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "But judgment must include wisdom and awareness. This woman is no ordinary visitor. She is a decorated officer, recognized for her work in both field operations and strategic planning. She comes with orders directly from headquarters, and her presence here is vital." The words hit the young officers like a physical force. They stared, mouths slightly agape as the realization sank in. This was the woman whose ID they had questioned. This was the person who had been detained. Emily remained still, composed, though inside a quiet satisfaction stirred. She had anticipated this recognition, but she never let anticipation show. She had learned long ago that true authority does not demand acknowledgement. It earns it through presence and action. The officer who had detained her first stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. "Ma'am, we..." His voice faltered. Emily smiled gently, holding up a hand. "There is no need for apologies. I understand the responsibilities you carry. Protocol exists to protect everyone here, and I appreciate your vigilance." The tension eased further as the commanding officer nodded approvingly. "She understands your actions. That is why she has my respect." Nearby personnel who had gathered during the commotion watched in awe. Whispers filled the air. "Did you hear? She's Emily Carter, decorated, from the operations in the North Sector." Even the younger soldiers felt the shift. The same woman they had seen detained was someone who had accomplished feats most of them would only hear about in briefings and reports. Emily's presence changed the energy of the base. Where suspicion and tension had ruled, calm authority now settled. The military police who had detained her straightened their posture, pride replacing embarrassment, and began to see her not as a threat or anomaly, but as a figure of remarkable competence and character. The commanding officer gestured to the gate. "She will proceed inside. Escort her safely. Let no one forget the lesson here. Protocol is vital, but judgment without wisdom can mislead even the most disciplined." As Emily walked through the gate, the younger officer whispered almost to himself, "I can't believe we stopped her. We had no idea." Emily glanced briefly over her shoulder, offering a serene smile. the kind that carried both warmth and unspoken understanding. It was not smugness. It was not triumph. It was recognition of the importance of patience, composure, and dignity, qualities that had carried her through every challenge in life, including the very one she had just faced at the gate. Inside the base, everything moved with precision, yet there was a new energy, a subtle acknowledgement that authority comes not from uniform, rank, or protocol alone, but from courage, competence, and the quiet command of presence. The officers at the gate remained behind, humbled, reflecting on the lesson they had learned in those tense minutes. Never underestimate a person based on appearances or incomplete information. Emily's calm walk down the main road of the base seemed almost symbolic, a silent affirmation of her identity, her achievements, and the authority she carried without needing to demand it. By the time she reached her assigned area, the base personnel had already begun to spread the story, not as gossip, but as inspiration. Her arrival, her composure, and her quiet triumph over misunderstanding became a lesson in respect, patience, and the power of dignity. And while Emily prepared for the work ahead, she knew one thing clearly. The gate incident was only the beginning. True challenges and the chance to prove herself further awaited inside the base. The story of her patience, authority, and quiet power had just begun to unfold. The gates of the base had closed behind her, but the echo of the confrontation lingered. Officers whispered in hushed tones, shaking their heads in disbelief. Who was she really? How had a single woman detained at the gate and questioned for minutes commanded such authority without raising her voice? Inside the command building, Emily's presence commanded the room naturally. Every step she took was deliberate, confident, yet unassuming. She moved past the polished floors and strategic maps on the walls, her gaze calm but assessing. Soldiers and officers alike watched her, some with awe, others with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. The commanding officer, General Matthews, met her in the operations room. His expression, stern at first, softened the instant he recognized her. "Emily Carter," he said, voice warm with respect. "You've already made an impression before even stepping into your assignment." Emily inclined her head politely. "Sir, I simply followed procedure, and I respect those who uphold it." "Followed procedure?" the general asked, a small smile breaking the sternness of his features. "You tested it, you challenged it, and yet you did so without disorder. That takes a level of authority that is rare in these walls." Emily nodded silently, her calm composure betraying no sense of pride. She had learned long ago that true respect was earned quietly, through actions, not words. Back at the gate, the two military police who had detained her were still standing at attention, replaying every moment in their minds. The younger one, Private Harris, whispered to his partner, "We judged her, without knowing anything. I feel embarrassed." The senior officer, Sergeant Lawson, sighed deeply. "It's not just embarrassment, it's a lesson. You can follow rules perfectly and still fail to understand the person in front of you. We nearly treated a decorated officer like a civilian trespasser." Harris shook his head. "If only we knew who she was before." "Knowing isn't the point," Lawson replied quietly. "Respect isn't earned from recognition alone, and it's earned from presence, patience, and composure. She had it. We didn't." The two stood in silence, reflecting on the humility and wisdom embedded in that single encounter. A subtle shift had occurred, a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that authority and competence could not always be measured by papers or systems. Meanwhile, inside the base, Emily moved quickly into her assigned responsibilities. Her task was not simple. She was to oversee a critical operation involving strategy, coordination, and personnel management. But every step she took carried the same calm authority she had shown at the gate. Soldiers who had previously doubted her now watched her carefully, ready to follow instructions with precision. Orders were issued clearly, assignments delegated efficiently, and a plan unfolded with flawless execution. In a briefing room later that afternoon, she stood before officers and enlisted personnel, presenting a complex strategy. Every diagram, every tactical plan, was explained with clarity and confidence. Questions were met with precise answers. Suggestions were welcomed and incorporated. The room, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now buzzed with cooperation and energy. By the end of the session, General Matthews nodded in approval. "Emily, you've not only proven your capability, but you've also inspired everyone here. Your calm decisiveness has transformed the mood of this unit." Emily smiled faintly. "Sir, I only hope to serve effectively. It is the people and the mission that matter most." Later that evening, Emily returned to the base gate, not as a detainee, but as a respected authority. The two military police who had detained her earlier stepped forward to salute. "Ma'am," Sergeant Lawson said quietly, "we owe you an apology. We did not recognize you, and we acted without understanding. That was our mistake." Emily's response was gracious. "There is no need for apology. You were following procedure. It is your duty. The lesson lies not in blame, but in awareness. Protocol is essential, but understanding the person behind the protocol is equally important." Private Harris added softly, "We've learned more in the last few hours than in months of training." Emily inclined her head, her calm eyes radiating quiet wisdom. "Then you have already begun to grow." The young officers nodded, humbled, understanding that respect and judgment were earned, not assumed. Over the next few days, Emily's presence continued to influence the base in subtle but profound ways. Soldiers who had once been skeptical now sought her advice. Officers admired her patience, clarity, and unwavering composure. Even the smallest acts, a gentle word to a stressed soldier, a nod of recognition for a junior officer, rippled through the base, reminding everyone that leadership was not just rank or authority, but empathy, intelligence, and courage under scrutiny. The gate itself became a symbolic location, the place where assumptions were challenged and lessons in respect were quietly learned. Soldiers would recount the incident to newcomers, a story of humility, wisdom, and the power of composed authority. Emily, for her part, moved through her duties without fanfare. Her identity was known, her skills respected, yet she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had defined her at the gate. She did not need accolades. She did not seek them. Her work spoke for her, and in doing so, it transformed the environment around her. As the sun set over the base, casting long shadows across the meticulously maintained grounds, Emily paused for a moment outside the main building. She looked toward the gate, where soldiers still carried on their duties, now with renewed awareness and humility. Her calm gaze softened. She had arrived in a world governed by rules and hierarchy, and in a matter of hours, she had reshaped perceptions, not through force, not through anger, but through presence, patience, and quiet authority. The military police who had detained her were no longer embarrassed, they were enlightened. The base personnel who had whispered skeptically now regarded her with respect. And the commanding officer, General Matthews, had seen firsthand that true authority is not measured by recognition or title alone, but by actions, composure, and unwavering dedication. Emily's journey was far from over. Challenges awaited, missions to complete, and obstacles to overcome. But at that moment, she had proven a truth that would resonate far beyond the gates of the base. Appearances can deceive. Authority is earned through action. Respect is commanded through patience. And true strength is shown not in confrontation, but in calm dignity. And with that, Emily Carter stepped forward into the base, no longer questioned, no longer doubted, and fully recognized, not just for her identity, but for the quiet power she carried within.